Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this video is a quick preview and prediction for Andy Ruiz versus Luis Ortiz. This fight goes down on the 4th of September, which funnily enough is a Sunday, so this weekend. And it takes place at the Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles. Now, I actually quite like this heavyweight matchup. I think it makes a lot of sense for both guys right now in their careers. And really, you know, if any one of these guys wants to go on to be a factor at the top of the heavyweight division, it's a must win. Luis Ortiz is, 42, 43 years old? So if he loses this fight, he is done. There's no rebuilding process from there. And although Andy Ruiz is a lot younger, he is around 32 years old. But the reality is, when it comes to Andy Ruiz, a lot of people lost faith in him and were really disappointed in his effort in the Anthony Joshua rematch. He turned up in horrible shape. I know that is Ruiz's career, but he was in even worse shape in that Joshua rematch, and he looked dreadful, quite frankly. And if he were to lose to a 43-year-old Luis Ortiz, then surely Andy Ruiz is done. You know, this fight really for both guys is high stakes, so I like it in that sense. And even stylistically, I think this one could actually be, you know, a pretty decent watch, to be honest. But yeah, let's briefly break down the tale of the tape. We shall start with Luis Ortiz. Luis Ortiz has a record of 33 wins, 2 defeats, 0 draws. 28 of those 33 wins coming by way of knockout. Of course, both losses coming to Deontay Wilder. Andy Ruiz has a record of 34 wins, 2 defeats, 0 draws. 22 of his 34 wins coming by way of knockout. Luis Ortiz is listed as 6'4" with a 78-inch reach, whereas Andy Ruiz is listed as 6'2" with a 74-inch reach. So Luis Ortiz is considerably the taller and longer man. Officially, he's got a 2-inch height advantage, but quite frankly, I actually think Andy Ruiz is shorter than the listed 6'2". I think he looks more close to 6 foot, maybe 6'1", but I don't think he's 6'2", to be honest. But regardless, officially, Luis Ortiz has a 2-inch height advantage and a 4-inch reach advantage, and that could stand him in good stead to win this fight, who knows. Luis Ortiz, of course, is a southpaw, which is interesting because I don't really recall Andy Ruiz fighting too many good southpaws in his career. Andy Ruiz is an orthodox fighter. Luis Ortiz is the ripe old age of 43 years old, whereas Andy Ruiz is 32 years old. So now the tale of the tape is out of the way, let's briefly break down what I believe each guy should do to stand the best chance of winning this fight. And I think I'll start with Luis Ortiz. I think with Luis Ortiz, I think he would be best suited to stick to the basics in this fight and essentially try to box using his height and reach. Andy Ruiz, as we know, is shorter, his arms are shorter as well, and he's got slow feet. He's not very good at cutting the distance when he's fighting a guy who's moving backwards. I know Luis Ortiz isn't the most fleet of foot these days, but I don't think he has to be to effectively maintain range against Andy Ruiz. Andy Ruiz himself has pretty slow feet, quite frankly. So yeah, I think Luis Ortiz primarily needs to keep this fight long, especially early on, so he doesn't sustain damage and make it hard for himself going down the stretch. I think he needs to box this fight behind that southpaw jab, try to get over the lead hand of Andy Ruiz using that height advantage, and box behind that jab, taking the half step back, making sure that your back doesn't touch the ropes or you're not trapped in a corner. Try to maintain range, just take that half step back, pop the jab, and look for counterpunch opportunities with that straight left hand. You know, maybe even try to hold center ring and maintain range that way and box in center ring. but keep Andy Ruiz at a distance. As we know, Luis Ortiz is a pretty good counterpuncher for a heavyweight, and one shot I think he needs to look out for here against Andy Ruiz is the check right hook. Now, of course, when you're a southpaw, your lead hand is your right and your right hand is forwards, and you're fighting the orthodox, and that's his left hand is forwards, that's his lead hand. Andy Ruiz has a habit sometimes of opening up with a left hook, and sometimes what he'll do, he'll bring it from low and kind of bring it up, and then he'll really step into it, and sometimes he'll lunge in. Andy Ruiz does use that left hook to kind of close the distance, you know, and if Luis Ortiz can notice that pattern, I think he can time it because he's the taller man. He can get his hook over Andy's hook and maybe even walk him into a check right hook, and maybe even knock Andy off balance as he's trying to come in. I think the check right hook for Luis Ortiz could be an effective shot in this fight for him. Again, maybe it could, result in a flash knockdown. It could make Andy Ruiz reset so he can box again, that sort of thing. That could be a very key shot for Luis Ortiz. And honestly, with Andy Ruiz, I think Luis Ortiz he can't afford to sit in the pocket with Andy, because that is where Andy is most comfortable, when he can block and parry shots and come back with his own combinations, particularly those hooks. That's how he hurt Joshua. After all, he's very comfortable at throwing with you, and as Luis Ortiz has got older, he's got more of a habit of standing completely still, where he'll really open up and sometimes even trade with guys. Ortiz is quite accurate, he's got good timing, but at 43 years old against a younger, fresher man with quicker hands, I think Luis Ortiz needs to avoid as many of those moments in this fight as he can. There may be times when he needs to trade with Andy, and obviously if those occasions come, that's exactly what he needs to do, but he needs to minimise those occasions in this fight, because to me, that gives Andy a much better chance. Again, Luis Ortiz is actually comfortable up close, but I think Andy's better, and he's certainly got quicker hands. And especially considering Ortiz's age, I'm not sure that his punch resistance is where it was once at, and I think that's where Ruiz generates most power, is at mid-range and somewhat on the inside. So Luis needs to avoid those moments in this fight if possible. But for Ortiz, I think it's primarily throwing the 1-2, taking the half step back, look out for counterpunch opportunities, box long, keep Andy Ruiz at a distance. He's not effective on the outside, not in my opinion. I don't think Andy's that great on the outside at all, to be honest. So for me, the plan for Luis Ortiz is quite simple. It's whether he's got the legs to do it for 12 rounds, and that could be his big problem in this fight. And if that is the case, if his legs are totally gone and he can't do that for 12 rounds, then he's going to be in a bit of trouble here, and then he will have to trade with Andy Ruiz. And if that is the case, Ortiz needs to be showing that variation in his offense. He is a good body puncher for a heavyweight. He needs to be going down to that body. I would say come through the middle. If you're exchanging with Andy Ruiz, I would try to avoid hooking with him, and I would come through the middle with the uppercut. It's a shot that Ortiz throws very well from both hands, to be honest. So I'd be looking for the uppercuts. If you have to exchange with Andy Ruiz, try to look for the uppercuts primarily and avoid just getting in a hook exchange with Big Andy. But we'll see with Luis Ortiz. It's hard to predict because he is so old at the end of the day, As for Andy Ruiz, I think in this fight he needs to be certainly quickening those feet up to apply pressure on the ancient Luis Ortiz. Hopefully he comes in this fight in better shape, better cardio, quicker feet, that sort of thing. But I think he needs to approach this fight primarily behind that high guard and try to walk down Luis Ortiz. Now, do it in a patient fashion. Early on, that may mean that, he loses the first couple of rounds because Ortiz is keeping it long and kind of, Ruiz can't get in close. But if he can remain nice and compact and just slowly walk down Luis Ortiz throughout this fight, eventually at 43 years old, Luis Ortiz is going to slow down. And at that point in time, you can be using that guard, that high tight guard, as almost like a radar, like a sensor of when to explode with your own counter punches. And, you know, I certainly think they'll be there against Luis Ortiz. He's got a low lead hand, so naturally the left hook, if Ruiz can close the distance, could be a good shot for him. Even the short right hand at mid range could be a very good shot against the southpaw. Sometimes Ortiz does have a habit of squaring himself up a little too much, and again that kind of short right hand at mid range could be a very effective shot for Andy Ruiz. And naturally as well, as Ortiz gets more stationary in this fight, I think it would be wise for Andy Ruiz to work the body, because obviously Luis Ortiz is 43 years old. He's seen better days. Test that body, wear those legs out, you know, go to the body. That's one thing Andy Ruiz, in my mind, hasn't really done enough in his career. He did it well against Joshua. After the third round, he really took it out of Joshua in that first fight to the body. I want to see more of that in this fight. I think Ruiz should be a much more prolific body puncher than he is, but I think that really stems from that he can't close the distance quick enough in many of his fights. But I think against Luis Ortiz, naturally as Ortiz gets more tired, he will give up ground. He'll let Ruiz walk onto him, and that's really where Ruiz is in his wheelhouse, where I think he's got more chances in the exchanges, and I would advise Andy Ruiz to actually throw with Luis Ortiz. I think he's got the quicker hands. I think he's more compact with his work, with his punches up close. And yeah, I would encourage, as this fight plays out, Andy Ruiz to actually exchange with Luis Ortiz, because I think he can land the more telling shots and get to that chin quicker. But early on, I think he should be somewhat cautious in his approach, but try and walk down Luis Ortiz behind that tight guard. You know, throw the odd jab here and there. If a shot's open, take it, but don't go gung-ho. Don't let Luis Ortiz counter you coming in, because Luis Ortiz does hit hard. And as we saw in Andy's last fight, I mean, Chris Arreola hurt him, so if Ortiz lands flush with that check right hook, or especially the straight left hand, then Andy Ruiz can get hurt in this fight, no doubt about it. So he needs to be compact early on, defensively responsible, don't take too many risks, only take shots that are there, you know? And as it plays out, Luis Ortiz naturally is just going to get tired, and that's when Andy needs to go to work, needs to work the body, needs to try and exchange with Luis Ortiz and make him roll the dice, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting fight. It's a shame it's on pay-per-view out there. To be honest, I don't think it should be on pay-per-view. I'm not even sure what channel this is on in the UK, but it's a good fight. More than likely, I'll watch it the next day. I'll catch a copy. But yeah, my official prediction, it's a weird one, because if you asked me 4 years ago who would win this fight, I would say Luis Ortiz on points quite confidently. But now Ortiz is 43 years old. I heavily lean towards Andy Ruiz. My only deliberation, or my only struggle here, is picking which method Andy wins in. I'm going to say Andy Ruiz on points. Unanimous decision. I think Luis Ortiz might start okay, win a few rounds early on, but I think Andy will just outwork him in this fight, especially down the stretch, and he'll win a competitive points decision, but a clear points decision. So yeah, I've got Andy Ruiz by a UD, I guess I would say. But what about you guys? Do you guys give the 43-year-old Luis Ortiz any chance in this fight? Share your thoughts below. Can Ortiz do it at 43? If he did, that's a pretty good win at this stage of his career. Share your thoughts below though. Tell me how you see this fight going. Peace.